The notification lit up Sarah Chen's phone at 3:47 a.m., followed immediately by two more. Her hand moved automatically toward the device before her brain could protest. 6 hours later, she would struggle to remember what those notifications contained. But the dopamine hit had already done its work. Sleep was finished for the night. Sarah was a successful marketing executive at a Fortune 500 company, commanding a six-figure salary and managing campaigns that reached millions. By every external metric, she was winning. Yet as she sat in her luxury apartment, surrounded by the fruits of her ambition, she felt a profound exhaustion that no amount of caffeine could cure. Why are you tired? The question had haunted her for months. Not physically tired, though the chronic neck pain from endless screen time was real enough, but emotionally, psychologically drained. She woke up each morning already defeated by the day ahead. She'd blamed herself, naturally. Poor sleep habits, lack of discipline, insufficient purpose. She'd tried meditation apps, productivity systems, digital detoxes that lasted exactly 18 hours before she convinced herself she needed to check just one important email. But that Tuesday morning, scrolling through her feeds while her coffee grew cold, Sarah encountered something that changed everything. A passage from Henry David Thoreau's Walden. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. The words hit her like a physical blow. When had she last done anything deliberately? When had she last chosen her response instead of simply reacting? Her phone buzzed, Slack notification, Instagram-like, news alert about a celebrity scandal she didn't care about. Each ping demanded a piece of her attention, her consciousness, her life force. She was being metabolized by machines designed to harvest her focus and convert it into profit for strangers. The stimulated mind is the captured mind, she whispered, reading further about Thoreau's experiment. For the first time, Sarah understood the trap. She wasn't using these platforms. They were using her. Every notification was a slot machine pull, every scroll an injection of intermittent reinforcement designed to keep her coming back. Her nervous system was being played like an instrument, and the song it was learning was dependency. The executives who designed these systems sent their children to tech-free schools. They bought themselves silence while selling everyone else chaos. That evening, Sarah made a decision that her colleagues would later call career suicide. She would become boring. Not defeated, not checked out, not giving up on life, but strategically, deliberately boring. She would make herself ungovernable by their metrics, invisible to their algorithms, useless to their extraction machines. She started small. Phone on airplane mode for the first hour after waking. No news during breakfast. A single book instead of 3 podcasts during her commute. The withdrawal was immediate and brutal. Her brain had been conditioned to expect constant stimulation. Silence felt like suffocation. Empty moments stretched like chasms. But Sarah held the line, remembering Thoreau's courage. In 1845, he had walked into the woods with an axe and a plan that everyone called insane. They called it retreat. He called it war. The difference, Sarah realized, was in the intention. Thoreau hadn't run away from society. He had conducted an experiment on it. He had questioned the fundamental assumption that busyness equaled living, that stimulation equaled consciousness, that more equaled better. Aoish, what if most of what we call living, Sarah wrote in her journal that night, is actually a sophisticated form of dying slowly? The system could not tolerate someone who didn't want more, someone who looked at the frantic masses sprinting toward mirages and simply didn't run. Sarah was about to discover just how dangerous strategic boredom could be. 3 months into her experiment, Sarah faced her first real test. Her boss, Marcus Wells, called an emergency meeting about her declining engagement metrics. Your social media presence is down 70%, Marcus said, scrolling through analytics on his tablet. Client interaction frequency has dropped. Your response time to non-urgent emails has increased to 4 hours. Sarah, what's going on? Sarah looked at Marcus, really looked at him. Dark circles under his eyes from chronic screen addiction. The telltale neck curve of someone who spent 14 hours a day hunched over devices. His coffee cup was his fourth of the day, and it wasn't even noon. I'm focusing on deep work, she replied calmly. The Peterson campaign I delivered last week generated 3 times the ROI of any campaign our department has produced this year. Marcus frowned. It was true. While her colleagues were drowning in digital busy work, Sarah had been producing work of unprecedented quality. By protecting her attention like a finite resource, by saying no to every non-essential obligation, she had created space for the kind of thinking that actually mattered. But you're not visible. Marcus struggled to articulate his discomfort. Leadership notices engagement, not just results. Leadership notices what drives profit, Sarah countered. My boring life is now generating more value than my previous frantic performance ever did. That evening, Sarah reflected on the encounter. She was witnessing something Thoreau had predicted: the system's inability to tolerate genuine non-participation. She wasn't rebelling dramatically or publicly. She was simply opting out of the attention economy. And that quiet refusal was being treated as an act of aggression. Her phone buzzed less frequently now. The algorithms had learned that she wasn't a reliable reactor, so she was becoming invisible to their targeting systems. She no longer received the constant stream of manufactured urgencies that had once dominated her days. The silence was revealing. Without the constant input of others' agendas, Sarah began to hear something she hadn't noticed in years: her own thoughts. She discovered that boredom wasn't the absence of productivity. It was the precondition for deep productivity. When she sat quietly with nothing to react to, her mind began connecting disparate ideas, synthesizing patterns, making creative leaps that had been impossible in her previous state of constant stimulation. Like Thoreau watching ants fight on a tree stump with the intensity of an observer at war, Sarah began to see the hidden dynamics of her office environment. The manufactured drama, the artificial urgencies, the way people performed busyness as a substitute for actual accomplishment. She started documenting the cost of each obligation in terms of life energy, just as Thoreau had meticulously recorded his expenses at Walden, that weekly marketing meeting where nothing was ever decided. 2 hours of her finite existence exchanged for institutional theater. The industry networking event where conversations were just mutual exploitation disguised as friendship. An entire evening of authentic presence traded for business cards she'd never use. The cost of a thing, Sarah wrote in her notebook, copying Thoreau's insight, is the amount of life required to be exchanged for it, immediately or in the long run. By this metric, most of what she'd been calling success was actually a form of sophisticated bankruptcy. Sarah's colleagues began to notice the change. Where she had once been reactive, she was now responsive. Where she had once been available for every crisis, she now distinguished between genuine emergencies and manufactured drama. Where she had once filled every silence with productivity theater, she now allowed space for actual thinking. You've become different, her friend Lisa observed over lunch. Calmer, but also kind of untouchable. Not untouchable, Sarah corrected. Ungovernable. The word had come from her reading about Thoreau's night in jail, when he refused to pay taxes that funded slavery and an unjust war. His refusal hadn't been passive. It had been a form of strategic non-compliance that made him impossible to control through conventional means. Sarah was discovering that the same principle applied to the modern attention economy. When you eliminated everything inessential from your life, there was nothing they could threaten to take away. When your needs became small enough, their leverage disappeared. But she was also discovering that true refusal required something most people couldn't tolerate: the ability to be misunderstood, To be called boring by people running in circles. To be labeled a failure by those who had never questioned what success actually meant. The test was coming, and Sarah could feel it building like pressure in the atmosphere. The confrontation came on a Thursday morning in the form of an ultimatum disguised as concern. "Sarah, we need to talk." Marcus had brought HR Director Janet Morrison to the meeting. Never a good sign. "Your performance review raises some concerns about cultural fit." Sarah set down her coffee and waited. She had learned from Thoreau the power of strategic silence. "Your engagement with team activities has declined," Janet read from her notes. "Your social media presence doesn't align with company branding expectations. Several colleagues have mentioned that you seem disconnected." "From what?" Sarah asked. The question hung in the air. Marcus and Janet exchanged glances. How do you explain to someone that their crime is not participating in their own exploitation? "From the collaborative environment we've built here," Marcus finally said. "The energy, the synergy, the manufactured urgency," Sarah interrupted gently. "The constant availability culture? The performance of busyness that masks the absence of meaningful work?" Janet's pen stopped moving. This wasn't the defensive response they had expected. "Sarah, we're offering you a choice," Marcus continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone delivering a verdict. "You can return to the engagement level we expect from senior executives, or we can discuss a transition plan that might better suit your current life philosophy." Sarah felt a moment of fear, the old conditioning kicking in, the threat of financial insecurity, professional ostracism, social judgment, all the leverage the system used to keep people compliant. Then she remembered Thoreau's mathematical proof. A human being could meet all their actual needs with a fraction of what most people spent. The rest was anxiety dressed as necessity, status dressed as requirement, fear dressed as ambition. "I'll take option 3, Sarah said. "There is no option 3, Janet replied. "There's always option 3, Sarah said, standing. "I quit." The words came out before she could second-guess them, but they felt perfectly right, like dropping a weight she'd been carrying for years without realizing it. "You're making a mistake," Marcus said, genuine concern in his voice. "This economy, this market, you can't just opt out. Watch me." 3 months later, Sarah was living in a small apartment outside the city, freelancing for clients who valued depth over volume. Her income had dropped by 60%. Her lifestyle had simplified by 90%. Her happiness had increased immeasurably. She worked 4 hours a day on projects she actually cared about. She read physical books slowly. She took walks without podcasts. She sat quietly and thought her own thoughts. Most importantly, she had become ungovernable. When the next economic crisis hit, when the next wave of layoffs swept through corporations desperate to maintain their growth metrics, when the attention economy collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions, Sarah watched from her protected position with the detachment of someone who had already won. She had discovered what Thoreau knew. The simple life wasn't simple because it was easy. It was simple because she had cut away everything that didn't matter until only what mattered remained. Her former colleagues, still trapped in their cycles of artificial urgency, called her crazy. But Sarah knew the truth. In a world designed to make you crazy, sanity looked like insanity to those still caught in the machine. She had become boring, unforgivably and powerfully boring. And in doing so, she had found something that no amount of stimulation could provide, a life that was actually hers. "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately," she wrote in her journal that evening, copying Thoreau's famous words. "And what I found there was not escape from life, but life itself, raw, immediate, and completely ungoverned by anyone's metrics but my own." The notification addiction was broken. The need for external validation had withered. The fear of missing out had been replaced by the joy of opting in, to silence, to slowness, to the revolutionary act of thinking for herself. Sarah had discovered that the most dangerous thing you could do to a system designed to exploit you was become boring. Not defeated, not broken, not checked out, but strategically, deliberately, unshakably boring. And from that boring life, she was building something that would outlast all the digital empires, a consciousness that belonged entirely to herself. The revolution was quiet, invisible, and absolutely unstoppable. One person at a time, choosing depth over stimulation, meaning over metrics, life over the performance of living. Thoreau's cabin in the woods had become a state of mind, portable and permanent. And Sarah was finally, completely awake.